Stasi, 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 Stasiland.
Chapter 4. Charlie. When I got out of prison, I was basically no longer human, Miriam says. On the first day at Hoheneck, Miriam was required to undress, leave the clothes she came in, and take in her hands the blue and yellow striped uniform. She was led naked down a corridor into a room with a deep-tiled tub in it. 2 female guards were waiting. This was the baptism of welcome.
Hello, me again. So I think with this one we've got this metaphor drawn from a biblical allusion, haven't we, with baptism of welcome. The sort of the humour there being that she's been given a bath, she's going to be cleansed before she is registered, signed in, shown to her cell, I guess. So it's making a mockery of this procedure, almost like it's a biblical baptism, and the capitalisation there of baptism and welcome, making it seem absurdly formal, and yet it is formal, but it's anything but a baptism. It's quite the opposite, really. It's sort of a dehumanisation rather than anything more humanitarian.
It was the only time she ever thought she would die. The bath was filled with cold water. One guard held her feet and the other her hair. They pushed her head under for a long time, then dragged her up by the hair, screaming at her. They held her down again. She could do nothing, and she could not breathe. And up. "You piece of filth, you little upstart, you stupid traitor, you little bitch!" And under. When she came up, the insults were what she breathed. She thought they would kill her. Miriam is upset. Her voice is stretched and I can't look at her. Perhaps they beat something out of her she didn't get back.
And just as you expect here, she pulls back to the present tense and how she is in the room with Miriam, the fact she can't look at Miriam, and the fact that Miriam's voice is stretched, and it's a real struggle for her to relate this information. Again, just like last chapter, it reminds the reader that this really happened, that this is someone struggling to tell their tale, and it's harrowing for us to hear, and it's harrowing for her to recall.
Miriam says the prisoners were brutal to each other too. She says the criminal prisoners received privileges for abusing the politicals. She says that for 18 months she was addressed by number and never by name. She says that there was a hoard and barter system, in fact a whole economy in sanitary napkins. I can't stay focused on the awfulness of it all, and my mind wanders disobediently to sitcoms. I think of the old TV series Prisoner, set in a women's prison, clanging metal gates before each ad break, and a kindly lesbian in the laundry, steaming away.
So I'm not sure if I need to stop every time it happens, and maybe I won't as the chapter goes on, but it's happening again, isn't it? She's describing how she, in the moment, is distracted, and it's too awful to think about, and she can't stay focused on it, so she's drifting away into sort of more popular culture references of women's prisons, with the lesbian in the laundry room steaming away. I mean, there's sort of a pun there, isn't there? I guess it's sort of steaming with the laundry, but also sort of, I don't know if that's sort of a suggestive phrase. I'm not quite sure, really. Maybe that's more my reading. I don't know. Anyway, moving on.
But Miriam has found her stride again. She tells me at Hoheneck the prisoners worked in a sweatshop making sheets. An ordinary day started at 4:30 a.m. with an alarm. When the warden's key rattled in the door, all the prisoners stood to attention against the wall. This was roll call by number. They were counted as well. They went to breakfast and then to the workroom where they were counted again, to make sure no one had run off between the cell and the canteen. If Miriam wanted to go to the toilet, she stood to attention and called, "Juvenile prisoner number 725 requests toilet permission." When she got back, she stood to attention again. "Juvenile prisoner number 725 requests permission to resume." Before going to lunch, they were counted. After lunch, they were marched around a yard for exercise, and then counted again. The prisoners were counted and recounted from the moment they woke to the moment they went to sleep. And, as Miriam says, chuckling, "You know what? The numbers were always right. Everyone was always there."
So there, the repetition of counting, counted, counting, recounting, and recounted, emphasising the tedious regime of the women's prison there, and the sort of bureaucracy of the thing, constantly reducing them to numbers being counted. And of course that's all part of being in prison. It's part of that, the psychological torment of being in prison as well.
Prison left me with some strange little tics. She has taken all the doors off their hinges in all the apartments she has lived in since. It's not that she has anxiety attacks about small spaces, she says. It's just that she starts to sweat and go cold. This apartment is perfect for me, she says, looking around the open space. How about elevators? I ask, recalling the schlep up the stairs. Exactly, she replies. I don't like them much either. One day, years later, her husband Charlie was fooling around at home, playing the guitar. Miriam said something provocative and he stood up suddenly, lifting his arm up to take off the guitar strap. He was probably just going to say, "That's outrageous," or tickle her or tackle her. But she was gone. She was already down in the courtyard of the building. She does not remember getting down the stairs. It was an automatic flight reaction. Charlie came out to coax her back up. He was distraught. She surprised them both with her tics in the first years they were together. All of a sudden I am very tired, as though my bones have gone soft. I look up and it is dark outside. I want someone to give her a rub. I want someone to give me a rub. I want the benevolent prison governess of TV land to have existed. I want the lesbian with the heart of gold to have protected the little girl, and I think of what is still to come. When Miriam was released in 1970, she was 17 and a half. Her sister took her to a lake to bathe. The lifesaver asked her out, but she was unable to respond. His name was Karl-Heinz Weber, but everyone called him Charlie. When Miriam didn't answer, he pursued her through her sister. He thought she was so odd and so quiet. He wanted to get to the bottom of it. "What were you like?" I ask her. "Well, you'd really need to ask him that," she says. "He was the one who brought me round again." Miriam crosses the room to a worn suitcase, which spills her photographs onto the floor. She finds one of Charlie. It is of a man in his 20s, with light brown hair and a neat face, looking straight at the camera. He is positioned oddly close to the left-hand edge of the photo. "Oh, that's because I cut myself out of it," Miriam says. Then she says, "That was our wedding photo." I want to ask, but I sit tight.
So here, it's worth just remembering that Funda has edited this and has sequenced this in such a way that we can't be certain that this was the order in which the events took place. And it's quite telling the way that Funda presents this, that this is such an obviously odd thing to do, isn't it, to cut yourself out of a wedding photo. It's so bizarre. And yet she places it at the end of that section, even with a page break there, presumably to add emphasis and to make the reader wonder and question in the same way that she wonders and questions, because it's so bizarre. And she even says, "I want to ask, but I sit tight," and then she makes us sit tight too with the page break there as well. So just a structural point really, but be aware of that and how Funda's using structure there, and just possibly question the reliability of the sequencing, I would say. We'll never know, we don't necessarily need to know, but it's important to be aware of that as an editorial choice.
Miriam and Charlie moved in together. Charlie had trained as a sports teacher, studying physical education and biology. In the GDR, sport was closely linked with politics. The government screened youngsters for their potential and fed them into training institutes for the glory of the nation.
So interesting that even there the government are sort of zoomorphically described as feeding children, youngsters, into their training institutes. So there's a sense of demonising the government even there, with this metaphor of feeding them. with something a bit barbaric and a bit zoomorphic about it, isn't there? So, which, you know, is fair enough, because the GDR, of course, were in many ways very inhumane. So it's an apt metaphor to use.
Did he know about the doping? Children at sports schools were given hormones under the guise of vitamins. In a scandal that has come to light since the wall fell, the pills accelerated growth and strength, but turned the little girls halfway into boys.
I mean, that's bizarre anyway in itself, but just as a structural point there, what Funda does is she gives us some speech, some of the dialogue, and then she reverts back into informative writing. So she says, did you know about the doping? This is asking Miriam, of course. And then she's telling us now, children at sports schools were given hormones under the guise of vitamins. And so we get these very... Well, it's a telegraphic sentence in the sense that it gives us information without any sort of fluff or flowery description. It's just straight in with the facts. And she intersperses, or juxtaposes, I guess you could say, the narrative and the dialogue with Miriam with these factual points that are there to educate and inform the reader.
Yes, he knew from 2 different people about that. I remember he once told friends of ours to keep their daughter out of one of those institutes, but that wasn't why he left teaching. In his early 20s, Charlie and a friend holidayed up on the Baltic Sea. When a Swedish boat came near the coast, they decided to swim out to it, just to see how far they could get. I don't think they wanted to board it or anything, she says. It was a bit provocative, but it was just a game. The authorities brought them in on suspicion of wanting to leave the country. That was the beginning of Charlie Weber's pursuit by the Stasi.
And there we've got this foreshadowing of Charlie's story, heightened, I guess, by the fact that the whole chapter is called Charlie. So we know there's some significance here. At the end of that paragraph there, saying it's the beginning of this pursuit by the Stasi, gives us that sense of narrative progression again. What Funda does is she gives us a thread of narrative progression all the way through to keep the reader interested, to maintain this sense of thrill, of this sort of pursuit, of this chase that the Stasi are conducting in the same way that they conducted against many people. So we're sort of being immersed into this world of espionage and chases by proxy, in a way. We're sort of being immersed in as well, because we too are following these threads and this investigative style of writing.
Charlie didn't feel that he could represent to his students the state that was doing this to him. He left teaching and started to write. He wrote articles for the magazine Eulenspiegel and treatments for television programs. He had jobs as a line producer on films and some work in the theatre. He wrote a small book, Miriam says, called Gestern wie heute, Yesterday like Today, about the way that one dictatorship here is the same as another. He sent it to West Germany, where it was published. After we started living together, me, an ex-criminal, and he under surveillance, they would come over and search the house from time to time, she says. When our neighbour, an old woman, saw this happening, she offered to keep a trunk of our books and Charlie's manuscripts at her place, because they'd never suspect her. We made some mistakes, though. I remember one time they were here, young blokes going through all our drawers, everything on the desks, the record collection. One of them was up a ladder searching the bookshelves when he found Orwell's Animal Farm, which of course was blacklisted. We held our breath as he pulled it off the shelf. I remember the cover clearly. It was the pigs holding a red flag aloft. We watched as this young man looked at it, the pigs and the flag. Then he put it back. Afterwards we laughed. We could only think that he saw the pigs, that was bad, but that they were holding a red flag, and they seemed to be on a collective farm. He must have thought that meant it was all right. I was prohibited from studying, and I couldn't get any kind of job at all, Miriam says. Everything I applied for, the Stasi made sure I was turned down. Employers had to check my personal files, and the instruction was always, not her. I used to take a lot of photographs. Eventually, All I could do was send them to magazines with friends' names on them, and my friends would pass on the money they got for my work. She ruffles her hair. In a way, though, how we lived was quite good. We didn't have to submit ourselves to the sorts of structures and authority that we couldn't trust here. We managed. In 1979, Miriam's sister and her husband tried to escape to West Germany, concealed in the boot of a car. Charlie drove them to meet the courier who was to smuggle them over the border. The Stasi followed every move. The couple received prison terms, and Charlie was placed on a type of probation.
So only a very small point here, but just the use of that asyndetic list there. I've lost my place in the book. The Stasi followed every move. The couple received prison terms, and Charlie was placed on a type of probation. So a triadic structure with an asyndetic list there as well. Just, I think, to reinforce and emphasise the scale of the Stasi's operation, the thoroughness of the Stasi's operation, and the sort of inevitability. I think the triadic structure, the group of three there, just gives a sense of they did this, the other, and then that, or this, that, and the other. And it sort of gives us that sense of it was just very routine for the Stasi. A, B, C. They followed protocol, and that was that. So it's sort of almost a monotonous type of listing to reinforce the well, I don't know, not passive, but the sort of robotic, I guess is the word, isn't it? Robotic procedure that the Stasi had.
In September 1980, the West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt was scheduled to visit the GDR. At that time, the Solidarity movement in Poland was a source of tension for Eastern Bloc governments because it was a focus of hope for many under their rule. Then Schmidt's visit was cancelled because of East German government concern that it would lead to demonstrations for democracy in front of the Western television cameras. Nevertheless, the East German authorities had prepared for the visit. They had rounded up and locked away anyone who might protest or might in some way embarrass the government. By this time, Charlie stood under formal suspicion of the crime of attempting to flee the Republic. He and Miriam had put in applications to leave the GDR. Such applications were sometimes granted because the GDR, unlike any other Eastern European country, could rid itself of malcontents by ditching them into West Germany, where they were automatically welcomed as citizens. The Stasi put all applicants under extreme scrutiny. People who applied to leave were, unsurprisingly, suspected of wanting to leave, which was, other than by this long-winded and arbitrary process, a crime. An application to leave was legal, but the authorities might, if the fancy took them, choose to see it as a statement of why you didn't like the GDR. In that case, it became a Hetzschrift, a smear, or a Schmarschrift, a libel, and therefore a criminal offence. On the 26th of August 1980, Charlie Weber was arrested and held in a remand cell.
You'll have perhaps noticed a slight pattern here that towards the end of paragraphs she tends to finish with these short telegraphic sentences, and after this lengthy description of it being a criminal offence, we then get the sort of punchline in a way with this telegraphic sentence of the date and the fact that he was arrested and held in a remand cell. And I suppose the effect of that is the abruptness of it, isn't it? The telegraphic sentence just creates that real abrupt, shocking revelation, particularly at the end of a paragraph, that this has actually happened, that he has been found guilty of this crime of wanting to leave the GDR simply by applying to leave the GDR. It's sort of madness, really. In fact, a good book that you should read, if you get the chance, is called The Trial by Franz Kafka. It was written before the GDR, and Franz Kafka, I believe, was from the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia as it was then. And it's only a short book, but it's a fantastic, one of my absolute favourite books. And it's about the sort of impossibility of bureaucracy, and the fact that you can very easily tie yourself in knots, or anyone can tie themselves in knots, and the more you try and justify yourself and prove yourself innocent, the more guilty you end up seeming. That's just a side note, but you're welcome.
At first, Miriam's only contact with him was by letter. She was permitted no visit, and he could not call. Eventually, a half-hour visit was scheduled for Tuesday the 14th of October, the day before Miriam's most recent letter to Charlie came back to her, marked in handwriting, "Postal permission terminated." With it there was a Stasi card in the letterbox. "Visit authorization for 14/10/1980 withdrawn."
So it's happening again, that the short telegraphic sentences voicing or mimicking the abruptness and the cold, emotionless voice of the Stasi. And so it's interesting that Funder has also adopted that in some places to sort of echo that shock and that cold abruptness from the Stasi. So just always do look out for that and look at the effect of what's happening when she uses those short, abrupt and often telegraphic sentences.
On Wednesday, the 15th of October, an ordinary policeman in his green uniform knocked on their apartment door. "Is this the house of Herr Weber?" "Yes." "And you are Frau Weber?" "Yes." "Well, you need to report to the district attorney's office and collect your husband's things, because he is dead." He was gone before Miriam could find any words.
And of course, the ultimate telegraphic sentence there to finish that bit of dialogue there with the policeman. Very abrupt, very cold, and very indifferent.
The German Democratic Republic paid lip service to the institutions of democracy. There were district attorneys, whose job it was to administer justice, and lawyers, whose job it was to represent clients, and judges, whose job it was to pass judgment. There were, at least on paper, political parties other than the ruling Socialist Unity Party, but really there was just the party and its instrument, the Stasi. Judges often got their instructions from the Stasi, which, in turn, passed them on from the party, right down to the outcome of judgment and the length of the sentence. The connection of the party, the Stasi, and the law went from the ground up. The Stasi, in consultation with school principals, recruited obedient students with an appropriately loyal attitude for the study of law. I once saw a list of dissertation topics from the Stasi Law School at Potsdam, which included such memorable contributions to the sum of human knowledge as "On the probable causes of the psychological pathology of the desire to commit border infractions." There was no room for a person to defend themselves against the state, because all the defence lawyers and all the judges were part of it. Miriam went to Major Trost, the district attorney who was responsible for investigating Charlie's death. Trost told her Charlie had hanged himself. Trost said he was very sorry. In fact, they were all deeply, deeply shocked. He said he had been called to the cell immediately. Miriam asked what Charlie had hanged himself with. What had he hanged himself from? "I know those cells," she tells me. "There are no exposed pipes. Everything is smooth inside. There are not even bars over the windows. They are too small." Trost said he didn't know. "But you were called to the cell. How can you not know? You must have seen what a man is hanging from." "No." Miriam shakes her head, imitating his dismissiveness. "Well, what with, then?" She would not give up. That day Trost told her Charlie had hanged himself with the elastic from the waistband of his trousers. Miriam didn't believe it. She kept going back to his office and kept asking. They were being surprisingly gentle with her. Trost's deputy told her Charlie had hanged himself with his underwear. Another time Trost said it was a torn-up piece of bedsheet. She confronted him. "Underwear or bedsheet? Underwear or bedsheet? The least you people could do is get your story straight." Major Trost lost his cool. He said if she didn't leave the room, he would have her arrested. Miriam found out Charlie's body was being held in forensics at the morgue. She went there, but no one would let her in. She felt she was being followed.
Okay, so here we've got that, again, the contrast between the narrative, the dialogue, and then the present tense as well. And we're as frustrated by this dialogue as Miriam and Anna Funder, I presume. I must stop calling it Anna Funder. Just Funder, or Anna, not Anna Funder. They just roll off the tongue nicely. So I think the fact that we're given this dialogue so abruptly, I mean, that no, that holophrastic no. I know we can't really analyse this too much because this is just the direct speech of, what's he called, Major Trost. And so we can't really do much with that necessarily. But the fact it is a holophrastic one-word sentence, so abrupt, is frustrating for us, just as it was for Miriam. And the fact it's dragged back to the present tense to remind us that Miriam's telling this story is all the more sort of harrowing, really, and disturbing. We're not allowed to be lost in the narrative. We're constantly jerked back and reminded that it is an event that really happened to Miriam, and obviously to Charlie Weber.
She went to see Charlie's lawyer, Herr X, who was the Leipzig representative for Dr. Wolfgang Vogel in Berlin. Vogel was the government lawyer responsible for trade in people between East and West Germany. He ran a list of names and negotiated with the West German government the prices at which they would be, as it was called, bought free, freigekauft. There was a scale of prices which varied, apparently, according to the education of the person being bought. A tradesperson or clerical worker came more cheaply than someone with a doctorate. The exception was for clergy. A pastor cost nothing, because they were often independent anti-regime thinkers, and it was worth it to the regime to be rid of them. For East Germany, trading in humans was a source of hard currency, and at the same time a means of getting rid of those who would not conform. One way of getting onto Vogel's list, and thereby having a chance of getting out of the GDR, was to become a client of one of his regional representatives. That is why Charlie Weber had engaged X. By the time Miriam went to see him, X had had the Weber matter, now the investigation of a death in custody, for 8 weeks. Miriam sat down in his office and asked him to tell her what he had found out. When he opened his file on the desk, it contained only a single sheet of paper, the delegated authority from Vogel to take on the case. Instead of telling her anything, he asked, "Mrs. Weber, why don't you tell me what you know?" Miriam was wild. For days, she said, she had experienced the kind of anger that makes you not care any more, say things you would usually put a brake on. She replied that it was his job to investigate, so he should really be finding out and telling her. If he had done nothing for Charlie while he was in prison, she said, he could at least find out how he died. "Do I look insane to you?" the lawyer said, very cold. "Do I? You don't truly think I'm going to trot down there and ask what happened, do you? For that you had better find yourself another fool, young lady." Miriam is upset again. Here, across the desk, was the face of the system itself. A mockery of a lawyer making a mockery of her.
Ooh, that's good, isn't it? That's good writing. Well, I mean, it's awful. Obviously, what's happened is terrible, but the writing is good. The face of the system itself, personifying the Stasi, personifying the GDR, personifying the Soviet Union to an extent, that he's part of the system, he's part of the bureaucracy, and so personifying the system through him, these sort of grey-suited nobodies, really. A mockery of a lawyer. Excuse me. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. I'm so sorry. A mockery of a lawyer making a mockery of her, and that sort of repetition, or if you want to say anaphora there, not anaphunda, anaphora, of the word mockery of a lawyer, mockery of her, that parallelism there, or the syntactic parallelism, if you wish. Again, just to sort of make that phrase a bit more profound, I think. And it does make it more profound. She finishes a paragraph with that. It's a very short paragraph, but she finishes that paragraph with that phrase, which makes it all the more thought-provoking, I think. And it's a very powerful one, because we realise the frustrating, impossible situation that she finds herself in.
On Tuesday, the 21st of October, 1980, a Stasi man came to the door to tell Miriam that the corpse had been released from forensics, and that the ministry would like to be of service to her with the funeral arrangements. Miriam said she could manage on her own. "Of course, Mrs. Weber," the man said, "but do you have a particular funeral parlour in mind?" She told him to go to hell, and found a smallish funeral establishment. The woman behind the desk was old and kind. She said, "You know, Mrs. Weber, you would really be better off going to the Southern Cemetery, because they will organize the whole thing from start to finish and fill in all the forms on your behalf and so on. It would mean much less running around for you." Miriam didn't think anything of it. She left and went to the Southern Cemetery offices. She knocked on the door and was told to come in. "You're late. We were expecting you earlier," the man behind the desk said. "What? Who told you I was coming? I didn't know myself I was coming here until half an hour ago." I don't know. I don't remember." First of all, he suggested cremation instead of burial. Miriam said no. Well, actually, they said it was going to have to be cremation because they had no coffins left. Miriam bluffed. "I will bring you a coffin." The man left the room for a moment, then reappeared. "Today, Mrs. Weber," he said, "is your lucky day. We have one last coffin left." Unfortunately, however, he added, it was not going to be possible to lay out the body for mourners to pay their last respects. He gave no reason. "If that's the way it is," Miriam said, "I'm going to another funeral establishment and another cemetery." No, Mrs. Weber, no need for that. We'll see what we can do about a laying out then." The day before the funeral, Miriam and a friend took some of the wreaths she had received to the gravesite. There were too many to carry them all the next day. She noticed a fellow standing around, smoking, doing nothing much, watching. A woman in the uniform of a cemetery official came up to her. "Are you with the Weber funeral?" "Yes." "Well, I just wanted to say, don't you get too upset tomorrow if there's no laying out, because it may just be that there isn't." Miriam got her in full view, the smoker within earshot. "Let me tell you now, if there is no laying out, there will be no funeral. I will call the whole thing off with everyone standing around here. I will make the kind of ruckus you have never seen. Do you understand me?" The next day there was a laying out. Miriam says the coffin was far away behind a thick pane of glass, and the whole thing was lit from below with purple neon light. Even in that terrible light I could still see his head injuries. And I could see his neck. They'd forgotten to cover it up. There were no strangulation marks, nothing. She looks across at me. You'd think they would make sure to cover his neck if they wanted to stick with their story that he hanged himself, wouldn't you? From there the coffin was sunk to another level and reappeared on a trolley wheeled by cemetery employees to the gravesite. All these details are slowed down in time, stuck in the amber of memory.
We've gone there from a lengthy period of dialogue and factual information to very figurative description. So again, Funda's style there is mixing and juxtaposing the factual, the speech, the dialogue, with her own figurative, novelistic details. She refers to here as time being slowed down. Details slowed down in time, stuck in the amber of memory. So she's extending that metaphor there, that details are slowed down by time, stuck in the amber of memory, sort of like these prehistoric things being preserved. And of course, that's her observation of Miriam's story. That's not Miriam's voice, that's Funda's voice, reflecting on Miriam's struggle to recollect the facts. But it's a true point, isn't it? The fact that we can't necessarily take these at face value. This is something that Miriam has dredged up, and then we're having it filtered through Funda's own narrative as well.
In the minutes between the coffin sinking from view and re-emerging, she says, there would have been time for a body to be taken out. A great many people were at the funeral, Miriam tells me, but I think there were even more Stasi there. There was a van with long-range antennae for sound recording equipment parked at the gates. There were men in the bushes with telephoto lenses. Everywhere you looked there were men with walkie-talkies. At the cemetery offices Building work was going on. Stasi agents sat in pairs in the scaffolding. Everyone, every single one of us was photographed, and you could see in advance the path the procession was to take from the chapel to the grave. It was marked at regular intervals all along by the Stasi men, just standing around. When they reached the grave, there were 2 of them sitting there on a trestle, ready to watch the whole thing. As soon as the last person threw on their flowers, Miriam says, the cemetery people started piling on the earth, and it was too quick. It was just too quick. Miriam walks barefoot across the room to a desk and picks up some papers in a plastic sheath. "I made a copy of this for you," she says, coming back to the table. It is part of the Stasi file on Charlie Weber, a handwritten report signed by a Major Mahler. In it, all the divisional plans are set out for the organisation and surveillance of the Weber funeral. Miriam's telephone is to be tapped. She is to be called in for a clarification of circumstances the day before. Sound recording technology is to be used at the site. A photographic documentation of the event is to be made. Citizens of the Federal Republic of Germany attending the funeral are to be supervised to ensure they leave the GDR before curfew at the end of the day. The name of the pastor who will conduct the service regrettably could not be ascertained by this operative. Should negative enemy behaviour occur during the funeral, all men are given orders to use force to quell it, on the grounds that such actions would contravene the dignity of the cemetery premises. Major Mahler noted that the head of the Southern Cemetery, a Herr Maurer, had guaranteed the Stasi complete freedom of movement for the Weber action, and that should any of the Stasi officers be questioned by workers at the cemetery, they should be referred to colleague Maurer. Maurer knows that Mahler is an officer of the Stasi, and also knows him by his true name, not his undercover identity. All of this Miriam could have guessed from what she saw on the day. She points to the next line and reads it aloud. No definitive information is available as to the date for the cremation. This date can be ascertained from colleague Maurer on or after 31/10/80. Miriam hands the file to me. On the 30th of October, we buried a coffin. We buried a coffin, and they are setting the date for cremation the next day. Either there is no one inside that thing, or there is someone else in it. Miriam went to the Interior Ministry and added the claim of transportation of coffin to her application to leave the GDR. She wanted to get out, and she wanted to rebury Charlie in West Germany.
So just a couple of things to mention here. Firstly, the formality and the register of the bureaucracy of the Stasi, with these quotations, no definitive information is available as to the date for the cremation. This date can be ascertained from colleague Maurer on or after 31/10/80. So you've got the formality of language there, with words like verbs like ascertained, adjectives like definitive. It's very cold, it's very emotionless, and it summarises the modus operandi of the Stasi, I would suggest. And I think that's what Funder's suggesting too. And then just towards the end of that section, before the page break, in my copy, and I'm assuming yours as well, there's more narrative progression and tension here. I'll mention in a second, but this need and want to application to get out of the GDR, but also to take Charlie's body with her into West Germany and bury Charlie in West Germany. So she wants to exhume the body and take it to West Germany. So that's really more narrative progression and tension. Now, if it was a novel, we'd refer to this as rising action, because it's on the way towards the climax. It's something which is a problem which is trying to be solved. It's rising action. And yet here we are, this is non-fiction. So we're she's borrowing features of fiction writing, as we know. And here's another good example of that, as she wants to do something which is quite, and we can tell the problem there, can't we? We can tell this will be resisted by the Stasi and by the GDR, because this does not fit with their version of events, because presumably it isn't Charlie that they've buried anyway, it's another body. because they've hidden, or they've sort of, killed Charlie in prison, but want to destroy the evidence for that.
Every month or so she would be called into the Stasi for a chat. It went on for years. "What's all this about transportation of the coffin?" they asked her. "What do you want with the coffin?" "What do you think I want with the coffin? To take it for a Sunday stroll? I want to do with the coffin what one does with a coffin. I want to bury it." In 1985 they said to her, "You probably want to have the contents examined, don't you?" "What if I do? What am I likely to find other than that he hanged himself, as you say?" "You know there will be nothing left in the coffin. You won't be able to prove anything." "Well, why are you so preoccupied with it then?" she said, and took it as an admission of guilt. After a time, Miriam stopped obeying the cards that appeared in her letterbox, summoning her to their offices to clarify some circumstances. The only thing that ever got clearer was that they had the power in the circumstances. "It was silly. I stopped thinking I'd ever get out. They were playing with me like a mouse."
A few chapters back, you'll remember I mentioned epistrophe and anadiplosis, and I got confused between the two of them. Here we have got some epistrophe, and it's where the lines end with the word circumstances. So Miriam stopped obeying the cards that appeared in her letterbox, summoning her to their offices to clarify some circumstances. The only thing that ever got clearer was that they had the power in the circumstances. So by repeating that word at the end of both clauses, we have epistrophe. And the epistrophe there, E-P-I-S-T-R-O-P-H-E, the epistrophe there is designed to emphasise or push or highlight that word circumstances, which in itself is a very vague euphemism for the situation. So that the circumstance is sort of a euphemism for actually what's going on. So it's a very Stasi word in this case, the way it's been used, because it's a very abstract euphemism for the actual very real human events of Charlie Weber's suicide/murder/burial/cremation. The whole thing is very veiled in secrecy.
At 8 a.m. one morning in May 1989, Miriam's phone rang. It was the Stasi. They couldn't say why, but she was required to report to them without delay, this day, and bring her identity papers. Miriam thought if it wasn't cards in her letterbox summoning her to clarify circumstances, they were giving her wake-up calls. She had had a late night. She slept some more, then got up and had a shower, made the first cup of tea. At midday the doorbell sounded. A Stasi man, Division of the Interior. "Why are you still here?" he said. "This is my home." "You are required to report immediately to the ministry and bring your identity papers with you." "There's plenty of time. The day is still long, my friend." He stationed himself outside her door. She went down to the offices. An official took her ID papers and said she was to go to a photographer, and that after that she had an appointment with a public notary. Then she was to come back to collect her travel authority. "You are on a train tonight," he said. "That was when I understood," Miriam says. I was in shock. I said to them, "It's been 11 years since we lodged the application to leave, and now I can't even say goodbye to my friends?" "Mrs. Weber, the travel authority you have been issued is valid until midnight tonight. If you are found to be on GDR territory after that time, you will be here illegally, and you will be arrested. I would remind you," he said, holding them up to her in his hand, "that you no longer have any identity papers for this country." The train that night was crammed full of people being expelled from the GDR. It was as though anyone who might catch the glasnost virus had to be put over the wall.
So I don't know how good your Russian is, but glasnost was a phrase that was used. It wasn't coined by Mikhail Gorbachev, the Prime Minister. Is it Prime Minister? President? Leader of the USSR, the Soviet Union. But he certainly brought it back and used it around the mid-80s to describe a period of transparency and openness and honesty and scrutiny of leaders and a sort of willingness to listen to people and normal citizens' grievances about the situation. So not this sort of totalitarian state that we know and that we've heard about. It's sort of a time of renewed transparency and openness and honesty. But yet here she's saying that anyone with this glasnost virus, as she calls it there, so again a metaphor there of this sort of disease, anyone sort of wanting to actually demonstrate or feel or have real openness is sort of carted off on a train packed full over the wall and sort of given to West Germany as their problem.
Miriam had a small carry bag with 2 changes of clothes in it, and she was leaving her life behind. Her friends were going to pack up her apartment for her. For all she knew, she would never be back. No one had any idea that the wall would fall that November. Essentially, the deportation came 11 years too late, she says, and 6 months too early.
And the syntactic parallelism there of the phrasing of Miriam's words. So again, we can't really analyse these particularly because it's not Funder's style, it's just Miriam's voice. And we have to assume that Miriam did say this. The inversion there being quite surprising and slightly humorous because, of course, it was 11 years after she applied, but 6 months before the wall came down and there was no division between the East and the West anyway. So it was sort of meaningless, really. And it sort of, I guess, emphasises the pointlessness of that of their bureaucracy, because the wall itself came down only 6 months later in November of '89. It always, when I read this, it always surprises me that I was alive when this happened. I find it hard to believe that for the first 6 years of my life that part of Germany was like this. It's quite bizarre. That's in that's fairly recent times. That seems so shocking to me that was the case, that it was actually in my lifetime that this went on. It's really, really bizarre.
Night has fallen, and the city lights are spread out beneath us. In the dark, this could be any city, in any normal place. Some people are comfortable talking about their lives, as if they can make sense of the progression of random events that made them what they are. This involves a kind of forward-looking faith in life, a conviction that cause and effect are linked, and that they are themselves more than the sum of their past. For Miriam, the past stopped when Charlie died. Her memories of picnics or cooking meals or holidays, her real life are memories where she is a we, and those are the things she and Charlie did together. It is as if the time after his death doesn't count. It has been a non-time, laying down non-history. She is brave and strong and broken all at once. As she speaks, it is as if her existence is no longer real to her in itself, more like a living epitaph to a life that was.
So an epitaph there, just to clarify, not an epithet, but an epitaph is the words often inscribed on a gravestone to summarise someone's life or to sort of commemorate someone's life.
Why did you come back to Leipzig? I ask. Well, in this matter I've got going at the moment, it is better that I am here. It only takes me an hour to get to the offices of the investigators in Dresden. She smiles. And I am hoping, she says, and I see that under the smile she is fighting back tears, I am really hoping that the puzzle women in Nuremberg find out something about Charlie in all those pieces of files.
So again, this is, I think, the third reference we've had to these puzzle women. Second or third reference we've had to the puzzle women. And it's again a narrative thread that we're being given. I think I'm right in thinking that one of the chapters near the end is called Puzzle Women. In fact, maybe the last chapter. Oh no, the penultimate chapter is called Puzzlers. So we do get this sort of reveal of these people that we've been teased with from the beginning, really. So it's again more of a style of fiction, really, than non-fiction. But we're given this thread that we're following, these sort of breadcrumbs that we have to follow. And the puzzle women of Nuremberg, are certainly one of those narrative threads that we're being hooked along with, and it's a really powerful driving force for this narrative. Makes it a very compelling read.
Miriam wants Charlie's body exhumed, so she can know for sure what happened to him. I look out at the lights. She continues, "I don't believe he would have killed himself. I don't think he did. Of the two of us, he was always more worried it would be me who would crack under all that pressure." Not knowing what happened to Charlie is so hard, because if it was suicide, she was abandoned. I wonder what will happen to her when they dig up the coffin. If he was cremated, there will be nothing there, or someone else's remains. If it's Charlie, what could that tell her? Will she be released into a new life, or will the current one lose its purpose? Miriam can't afford to have the exhumation performed privately, so she hopes it'll be done in the course of the criminal investigation into his death that is now, apparently, being undertaken by the authorities of United Germany. But twice they have tried to suspend the investigation, and twice she has travelled to Dresden to bang on their desks. You know, they just want to stop thinking about the past. They want to pretend it all didn't happen.
And this banging on the desk, of course, is a euphemism there for this persuasiveness that she has, and she's trying to get this thing to get pushed through in what is West Germany, who are investigating into the crimes and the faults of the GDR. It's kind of incredible, isn't it, that this was published, was it early 2000s, was it? Bear with me. 2003. And so even in very recent years, the after effects, the hangover from the GDR and the Stasi are still being felt, and people are still launching investigations and pursuing investigations into the awful acts of the GDR. Even back then, it's horrible, isn't it? That even today, these investigations will still be dragging along as people try and put their lives back together again. It's really quite harrowing.
Most recently, the DA wrote to Miriam, saying that the investigation was to be suspended because a former employee of the Southern Cemetery had credibly assured him that there had been nothing untoward about the Weber funeral. She sent him in the file, highlighting the parts that referred to the body coming from anatomy, code for the Stasi mortuary, as if somehow the corpses coming from custody were coming from the medical school. The surveillance detail for the funeral, the part about Herr Maurer knowing the true identity of the Stasi man who was making arrangements with him, and the part about the cremation, scheduled to take place the next day. That stopped them, she says. I wrote, "Do you still think there was nothing untoward about the Weber funeral?" The DA replied that he hadn't yet read that section of the file. When Miriam inquired at the Stasi File Authority, she found that he hadn't even lodged a request to see it. "Do you ever run into any Stasi men you recognise in the street?" I ask. I think that is what would terrify me, in the nonsensical way in which it is horrible to run into someone who has wronged you. No, thank goodness. But I did try to find the people involved in Charlie's case. Shortly after the revolution in 1989, Miriam went to the cemetery to find Herr Maurer, but he had vanished as soon as the wall came down. The Stasi cremated a lot of people at the Southern Cemetery, she says. Miriam did find Major Mahler. She rang him and said she would like to meet to discuss the Weber case. They met in a cafe. Miriam took a friend along so she would have a witness. The friend sat at the next table, unknown to Mahler. Mahler said he didn't know anything. "No, the name Weber doesn't say anything to me." "Well, why did you come here then?" Miriam asked. I just wanted to see what you wanted." "But I told you on the phone that what I wanted was to talk about the Weber matter." "Oh, I thought you were going to tell me something." Did he want to know how much she knew, whether he was going to be uncovered or whether he was to be blackmailed? "It is amazing," Miriam says, "what a revolution can do to people's memories." A cloud of smoke covers her head and the high back of the chair. "There are some compensations, though, for being here. This apartment, for one," she says, and she's right. A siren wails past and subsides. She is a maiden, safe in her tower. And I think about those Stasi men. They would never in their lives have imagined that they would cease to exist and that their offices would be a museum. A museum! She shakes her head and butts out her cigarette. That's one thing I love to do. I love to drive up to the Runde Ecke and park right outside. I just sit there in the car and I feel triumph. Miriam makes a gesture which starts as a wave and becomes a guillotine. You lot are gone.
Yeah, so lots wrapped up in that last little bit there. If we just back up to the end of the penultimate paragraph, she's a maiden safe in her tower. That's a very interesting metaphor to use because it draws on that fairy tale narrative. And so we've mentioned before how Funda likes to use the narrative style of fiction writing in her non-fiction writing, and there it's a gift, isn't it, because that's borrowing literally from the most classic of narratives, the sort of oldest and most simple children's stories of a maiden locked in the tower. And then we get the last paragraph, and I think we feel for her, don't we, there? I think we identify that we too would feel the same if you could just drive up outside the headquarters and just feel triumph that you can now do that. And it's hard for us to imagine in the free world what it would be like, but there we are. Not that many years ago, this was the case that you couldn't just drive up there. The only place I can think of now where you wouldn't be able to do that, well, not the only place in this country, but the place near here is the what's it called? Menwith Hill, the RAF base just past Harrogate, where there's those massive golf ball looking things, where it's owned by the American military, and it's part of the what's it called? Part of the American surveillance system anyway, where it's a sort of spy network, isn't it, that can listen into emails and phone calls and things. And I know if you get too near there, they're very very protective. Anyway, that's irrelevant. But or is it? I don't know. Oh, is it a modern day Stasi? But anyway, she makes a gesture. It starts as a wave and becomes a guillotine. Interesting there, referencing the French Revolution there. So the revolution of Berlin, of Germany, I suppose, in 89, but also referencing the French Revolution there and the guillotine, I guess, maybe. And signifying the death of the Stasi, the death of the GDR. So there we are. That's the end of chapter 4. It was a long one, wasn't it? And then we're back again next time with chapter 5. Then the Linoleum Palace. That's quite hard to say, especially at this time of night. Night, everyone.